So Julius Madanix is seen to be this father. So he's the father of the decorative arts or design in Latvia. He could be compared on the one hand to William Morris and on the other to Christopher Dresser, because Morris was concerned with the handicrafts and Dresser was concerned with designing for industrial manufacture. And in a way, Madanix, it lies in between those two extremes. He also studies in St. Petersburg, but at the Stiglitz, the Central School of Technical Drawing, which was again focusing on producing artists, designers for production of wallpapers, ceramics, glass, etc. All of the Latvian artists in St. Petersburg, feeling a little disconnected to their homeland, they form their own little group, the Urukis, which means gnome or elf, by the way, in Latvian. And our three main Latvian painters that we've looked at, Rosenthals, Puvitis and Valther, they all belong to this Latvian artist society. And Madanix is no exception. So it's sort of like a little sort of homeland group in St. Petersburg. He then gets a traveling scholarship to Paris in the late 1890s, very important. Arriving in Paris in the late 1890s, Madanix would have encountered full-blown Art Nouveau. He probably would have been to visit Samuel Bean's famous gallery L'Art Nouveau, opened in 1895. And he is very heavily involved in this avant-garde magazine, Zaltist, which means literally grassed snake. That's how it translates. And this is the front cover of it with wonderful, as you can see, Art Nouveau calligraphy. And most importantly, we have a snake, grass snake, curled around the tree, perhaps a reference to knowledge, but also remarkably similar to the front cover of the Century Guild magazine, which was called The Hobby Horse and was a platform for their manifesto. So again, we could say that Madanix was influenced by the English arts and crafts movement. There's the Sun of Enlightenment in the background, but most importantly on this cross that you're looking at here, we have very obvious Latvian folk art motifs. This is supposed to be the head of a stag, by the way, in case you're wondering. And you can see how he's going to develop a forte, in fact, for things like carpet patterns and wallpaper patterns, hence my reference to him being involved, like Christopher Dresser, with design for industry. So a couple of book covers here. So the one on the left-hand side is more overtly in a obvious Jugendstil Art Nouveau idiom, stylized pine tree and what appears to be some sort of lily, whereas the slightly later one of 1909, also with the pine tree, but look at the very obvious Latvian folk art motif running along the bottom. In other words, the folk art motifs will grow in strength. So by 1910, so in fact, he's very important in Art Deco, and I'm even going to stray into Art Deco, so my apologies. So on the left-hand side, very much influenced by Japan. I remember being published his Artistic Japan, late 80s, early 1890s. So every artist, however hard up they were, had access to Japanese prints. And that's again a stylized pine tree. And then down the bottom, also from this, around about 1900 in date, you've got an emerging interest in Latvian folk motifs, but you can see that it's still predominantly in a floriated Art Nouveau idiom, whereas the designs, I love the one at the top with the little devils. Remember I said to you that the Latvian folklore, mythology, very keen on devils. All of the patterns on the left-hand side actually take us into the 1920s. And so technically are Art Deco. So just to remind you, Art Nouveau runs up to the First World War, and then Art Deco takes over with the 1920s. So 1919, heyday of Art Deco is the 1920s. Then we have the Wall Street crash, 1929, and in the 1930s, modernism really comes to the fore. Yeah, it could be a bit overwhelming if you had it all around you. This is no longer, I'm afraid, survives in its entirety, though portions of it have been rescued. Is one of the rooms in the ministry commissioned this interior decoration in 1925, because remember that these folkloric motifs are going to become even more potent during that brief period of independence, immediately after the First World War, so from 1919, say, to the mid-1930s, with the signing of the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact. All of this area will come under Russian power. So it's in that brief interlude when Latvia is independent for the first time from Germany or from Sweden or from Russia, bound to have a huge outpouring of motifs like this one that celebrates Latvian difference. It's the coloured section gives you an idea of how colourful it would have been, and that's a very small portion of it, or something very similar that survived. So these are all Art Deco examples of mixing Latvian folkloric motifs with furniture. So the desk at the top is actually from the 1930s. The dining table set, which looks more arts and crafts, doesn't it, in its deployment, as you can see, of very strong geometric decorative forms. There's a pine tree running up the back of the chair. They date to the 1920s. So you could argue again that you're sort of moving from an arts and crafts idiom to a more modernist Art Deco forms in the 1930s. And Madanix also designed for ceramics. So the little vase down in the bottom right-hand corner is also one of his designs. A sort of stylized pine tree, I think. Now, there's a heyday for Art Deco ceramics in Latvia, during this independence period. And I'm just going to move that, see if that comes up. Yes, that's better. So I photographed these in the Decorative Arts Museum in Riga. This is Studio Baltars, only operates from 1925 to 1928. And they win a Grand Prix, a gold medal at Paris 1925. There's a whole group of these decorating studios, Ripoors, founded by the wonderfully named Strunke. That's operating, as you can see, equally briefly, 1933 to 34. And then Birkenix was also another of these porcelain decorating companies. Aviation is the title of the plate, and that dates to 1926. So it's just to show you that the story that I'm telling you in Latvia, in a way, doesn't really end until they lose their independence due to the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact. Okay, so that was a useful link into the concept of interior decoration more generally. So he was commissioned, this is Madanix, he was commissioned to produce what you and I would call Gesamtkunstwerk, entire interiors. We can get an idea of what one of these might have looked like. The top one is one that no longer survives, was for a local attorney and dates to 1903. But we can get an idea of what these interiors by Madanix might have looked like by visiting the Latvian Art Nouveau Museum, which is at the bottom of Albertastrasse. So this is number 12, Albertastrasse. Architect is Konstantin Pekens, working with Eisen Laub. I can at least do the Laub part. And this is also where you're going to find the Rosenthals, Janis Rosenthals museum. So definitely needs to be probably number one on your tourist destination at the bottom of Albertastrasse, Alberta Street. And they've decorated this essentially to be in a Jugendstil Art Nouveau style. So it's not it's a mock-up, if I can put it that way, but using a lot of the original decorative motifs like the plasterwork in the ceiling. So the top one, left-hand side, is showing you the drawing room, which happens to have a rather beautiful bay window extending over the street, which gives you almost like a winter garden. And then the right-hand side one is the dining room, which has a very beautiful stained glass, or I should say leaded glass window. So these are the interiors of what is now referred to as the Art Nouveau Centre in Riga, in number 12, Alberta Strasse. So you can see that it's, you know, a middle of the road, a commercial type of Art Nouveau Jugendstil setting. And there's a rather lovely stencil running around the top of the room, and very delicate plasterwork based on flowers, so the French idiom of Art Nouveau. I love the piano on the right hand side, the embroidery on the table, beautiful tablecloth with embroidery on. And I have yet to really get to grips with the manufacturers for Art Nouveau furniture, or I should say Art Nouveau stroke Jugendstil furniture in Riga. But here is how pretty the ceiling is, with these little daisy motifs in plaster and in stencil. And this is another room in this Art Nouveau centre. It's the only Art Nouveau centre, by the way, in the Baltics, as far as I'm aware. So this is the drawing room. Here the motif running around the frieze is horse chestnuts, and we have a similar abstract motif on the ceiling, and rather a lovely tile fireplace. And then this is back to the dining room, where you can see a lot of the furniture looks very much to be in the sort of French idiom with curvilinear motifs, and a rather beautiful window. Above it, you can see again the motif of pine leaves, but also pine cones. That's the word I'm looking for. There's a rather beautiful Tiffany style window which looks out over Alberta Strasse. Right. Now, it also, this building by Pleschens, this is number 12 Alberta Strasse, also happens to have one of the best staircases in the city. And the trouble with visiting the apartment blocks, the very famous apartment blocks along Alberta Strasse, is there's no reason why you should ever be able to get into the lobbies. They're all private buildings. Many of them are in fact now governments, or even more so embassies. So you really do need to have a local guide who might be able to get you into some of the lobbies. You can see the staircase of number 12 Alberta Strasse easily, because you're heading to the Art Nouveau Centre or to the Janis Rosenthals Museum. I still saw it just when it was in the process of being restored, and the theme throughout, as you can see, is pine leaves and pine cones. It sort of picks up on the decoration that we were just looking at here over the window. I love the still life of fruit in the centre, but then with the very Art Nouveau decoration to either side, which I'm assuming is a stencil. So this is so pretty. So still vaguely Gothic, as you can see, in terms of the vaulting effect, but the Art Nouveau motif very clear in the pine cones and the pine leaves. Little vignettes of ancient Latvia, and this is going up the staircase. This is what it looks like today. This is one that you can actually see because you're legitimately going up the staircase to visit the Art Nouveau Centre. It's beautifully restored ceiling. So this is how I saw it. I saw it basically like the phoenix arising. So this is what it looked like in 2009, and this is what it looks like today. And all these lovely new images of it are taken from the Art Nouveau Centre website. So you can look at that at your leisure. I particularly like the little vignettes of ancient Latvia here, sort of like vernacular buildings on the left, very important in our stories, you'll see in a minute, going back to, again, medieval mythic past, and the river on the other side. So this is again a before and after. So I'm just reminding you that it's just like Budapest in the sense that Budapest was Soviet. They on the plus side, the buildings were left alone. You know, they weren't torn down, which they might well have been in the West when Art Nouveau went out of fashion. On the downside, they were just left, and so obviously, by the opening years of the 21st century, they all were in need of some TLC. They're also very hard to maintain because they are plaster on a brick structure, which means they need constant surveillance. So here it is, my before and after. On the left hand side, again, look at the theme of the pine cones. They do love pines. It's a popular motif in Nancy to represent the forests of Lorraine, and in particular the pine cone and the pine needles were seen to represent energy. It's an evergreen, but also if you're really heavily into symbolism, you'll know that the pine cone was seen to replicate the shape of the brain. Don't laugh. The penis, not penis gland in the brain, and therefore we're supposed to represent sort of like the seat of human knowledge and even the soul. If you've ever been to Sarah Losh's church in Cumbria, you'll know that I'm not stark raving mad, because she puts pine cones all over everything to represent this idea that the pine cone represents the sort of essence of human nature. Okay, so there's the squirrel, and I'm pleased to see that you can see him beautifully restored on the right hand side. So symbolism is obviously very important for our Latvian architects. So there are quite a few buildings, in fact, in the old town of Riga. So these maps are showing you how the Art Nouveau Jugendstil buildings are concentrated. So don't assume they're all in the new town. This little clutch here on the right hand side, that's all the old town. You can see there where the wall was, and here this column, I'm hoping my cursor works, is the monument to Latvian independence, that brief period of when they were a republic. And this Brivas is one of the most important main arteries in Riga. The other two maps, this is showing you the concentration around Elizabeth's Ilia or street, and going up onto Alberta, which is where all the Mikhail Eisenstein buildings are. You need a lot of shoe leather in Riga, but you take this loop, as you can see here, and I'll be showing you a lot of buildings from these two clusters. And then if you're up for it, the really long walk here, taking you along this artery, this Bridbaz. It's like an avenue more than anything else. This huge avenue, there it is there, and then parallel to it is this road with lots of buildings, taking you right out to Metzler Park, which was like a suburb, which also has a lot of Art Nouveau Jugendstil buildings. It's around about 2,000 of them altogether. And the good thing is that they are very much concentrated in areas. So don't try to do all of them, but you're probably going to do the city centre and this area around Elizabeth and Albert streets. Okay, so they have, and I still don't quite understand this, taken a very arbitrary view of how to subdivide their Jugendstil architecture. The Mikhail Eisenstein buildings are usually described as eclectic or decorative. These remind me of apartment blocks in Paris, where the Art Nouveau is skin deep. It's either a metal frame or a brick frame building with a plaster, sometimes a brick facade, and colourful brick facade, I mean, and a lot of ornate ornamentation in plasterwork. Mikhail Eisenstein fits that brief perfectly, and they are the most famous buildings in Riga. They then come up with this term perpendicular or vertical. I don't know why they've done this. I think I would have chosen to link this to Jugendstil in particular and Vienna, because that is their style. perpendicular and vertical, a more linear as opposed to curvy linear variant of the new architecture. And so that's what I would call this. I would call it the Viennese Jugendstil style. And then there's the National Romantic style, which is when you introduce motifs from folk art, which are very distinctively Latvian. This is short-lived, but very distinctive. It's very influenced by Finnish prototypes. Laub is particularly important, and he worked for Constantine Pekens. So sometimes when they're working together, you sort of feel that it is Laub who's really injecting the National Romanticism. And finally, down the bottom, Neoclassical. This comes in really after all the others. It's the style that's on the brink of the First World War. They return to a severe classical format. That's now the bottom right-hand side. It's now an institutional building in the center of Riga. And they're paying lip service, really, in the form of the odd Jugendstil motif. Essentially, it's a return to neoclassicism. We do the same here. We go through all our arts and crafts, semi-Art Nouveau buildings, and then we return to Lutzen style classicism around about 1910, exemplified in the Cenotaph building. Okay, so can show you how an artist will evolve. Remember now that we've got Latvian architects and we've got German Latvian architects. So again, if you're a German Latvian, you're more likely to look towards Jugendstil in Darmstadt or in Berlin. This is usually described as eclectic, though as you can see, it owes a little bit to the sort of Finnish concept of using hard granite, which was seen to be very much a material associated with the north, and those squat pillars are also rather Finnish in style. This is 1903. It's a combination of retail and apartment block, and is by a German Latvian, Bockschlaf. Right, that's him in 1903, and this is him in 1909. Now he has gone fully National Romantic and has been particularly influenced by Finnish forms. Look at the eave and look at those arches. They're not pointed, they're rounded. That sort of gable ends, and that's very much a Finnish feature. Also adding towers to everything, and then throwing in a bit of half timbering, it's quite plain, it's quite a flat facade, apart from the tower on the corner. There's an austerity, in fact, to many of these National Romantic buildings compared to the free-for-all that is Mikhail Eisenstein. What I hadn't realized until recently is that the vertical style, which, as I said, I associate very much with Jugendstil and with Vienna, may well have been influenced by, again, looking abroad, to one of the giants of the era. This is Henri van der Velde. By 1910, he's living in Weimar. He's been invited there by the Archduke to create a sort of progressive art educational program. He has completely transformed the Fine Art Academy in Weimar, but most importantly, he has also opened an arts and crafts school. He was he won a competition and was invited to build this block, which was associated with St. Peter's. To be sort of like, it was very close to St. Peter's. That's the church right in the city centre. It's no longer there. It was badly damaged in the war and then demolished after the First World War. So don't go looking for it. However, we have all the plans for it. We know what it looked like because it was a competition. And in the photograph, we have van der Velde looking at the plan. We also have him looking at the plan in his offices in the Weimar. And in 2013, they had a big exhibition in Riga to celebrate the building that is no longer there, because they obviously feel it's very influential on the evolution of Baltic Jugendstil architecture. And I think you can really see here what I mean about the verticality of an Henri van der Velde building. Right, so we're going to run through a sort of now a medley of famous architects and famous buildings, having sort of outlined a general plan for you. So we'll have some eclectic ones, we'll have some perpendicular ones, which will very much show the influence of Van der Velde and Jugendstil. We'll have some National Romantic ones, and we'll also be able to trace how many architects move from an international Art Nouveau style to one that is more obviously focused on National Romanticism in Latvia. So we're in the Old Town to start off. Auschen Camp, you can tell from their names that they're either German or German Baltic. This has the distinction, 1899, of being one of the very first Art Nouveau buildings in Riga. I think we can call this Art Nouveau because the floral forms on it very much relate to French Art Nouveau. It was built for a publisher, and the apple trees all over it obviously signify knowledge, but also wealth and fruitfulness. It's a very pretty building. Heinrich Schniel, and the interesting thing about these two conjoined, they're a partnership, is that you'll get their names in German and in Latvian, just to really confuse you. Different spelling completely. I've gone, in fact, for the German form here for Friedrich Schiffer. And this is one of the most obvious ideas of grafting Art Nouveau motifs onto basically a typical neoclassical building in terms of its arrangement. Again, it would have been retail down the bottom and apartments above. And it's like the Mikhail Eisenstein buildings. It's just a riot of decorative motifs. Naked ladies, female face masks, you name it. It's almost like you're proclaiming your wealth in the decoration. This is looking up, so it's to remind you that they have particular favorites. The mascarons, the masks, can either be female heads, male heads to represent Old Father Time, which is I think what you're looking at here, sort of summer and winter, with the two heads, the one on the left-hand side, old man, the one on the right-hand side, pretty young woman. This is where you'll find the sleeping woman, very symbolist, with the what appears to be an elf on her head. And then these look like Vikings, don't they, to either side of the entrance, which is the corner turret. It has the most wonderful lobby. I can't guarantee that you'll get to see this. This is the entrance to private apartments. I briefly looked inside. I could not photograph it, so I borrowed these from Hidden Riga. You can see some obvious influences here from Alphonse Moucher in the style of the ladies. Here they are, Moucheresque ladies holding up stylized roses. The roses look as though Macintosh has had a go at them. Remember that Macintosh is very well known throughout Europe by 1900. I love the painted ceiling, particularly love the spider's web. Again, it makes me think of the dangers of the femme fatale. And roses do seem to be the theme throughout, and you can also see that it's one of the buildings that has been magnificently restored. There's a delicatessen also in the building, cafe. You can pop in and have a look at that, which has also been beautifully restored. I love the stenciling going up the staircase. This is also by Heinrich Schniel and Friedrich Schiefel, and was again originally a department store for Detman. So again, this is we're back with the Baltic Germans with a vengeance. And the unusual facade, those big windows, is because this has always been for a department store, hence the D's all over it. Now, there's a nice reference to the Masonic order, the set square, and the on the corner here is very much a Masonic motif. This is in the Old Town, and you might easily miss it because you've got to stand back. It's quite a narrow street to get the full beauty of the building, which appears to be covered in poppies and again sort of face masks. So these are going to be metal framed, iron or steel. They're not yet, I don't think, concrete frame. But like I said, the thing to remember is that the Art Nouveau Jugendstil is often skin deep. The apartments in particular behind the facade will probably be quite conventional in terms of their layout. This is Paul Mandelstam's, also German, I think. No, actually, with that B over the S, he might be a Latvian. But again, this is a riot, isn't it, of symbolist motifs. You're entering via horse chestnut leaves through the door on the corner, and they love to put towers and elaborate corner decorations. And there's a certain amount of Viennese verticality, or even a Macintosh, creeping into the stylized motifs on this facade. Again, recently beautifully restored, and we are still in the old town. Constantin Peksens is probably their most important architect, much more so than Eisenstein, who gets all the glory because it's one building after another along Albertastrasse, which we will finish with. But this is standard, as you can see, neoclassical apartment, or sort of like Parisian Haussmann style, very conventional, until you start to look at the decoration. And then, as you can see, in 1901, there are very obvious Art Nouveau face masks. The rather beautiful angel right at the top. And this is on this main artery that runs through Riga. So you're looking here at a sort of forward-looking international type of architecture. But by 1902, and there he is in the corner, because he's like Odon Lechner in Budapest. He will have a school of architects who will work for him and then will go out and work independently, developing their own unique style. So this is one of the most famous buildings in the old town. Peacock in the middle. Again, look, you can see it's this must be a metal frame building. You can actually see where the lines of the floor run here. Look, these are where the framework will be. A skin of brick, lots of ornamental details, very famously. The squirrel and the owl are just trying to find them here. There's the owl, there's the squirrel, and there's the date of 1902. Here's a few close-ups. You can perhaps now see the owl and the squirrel better. Big peacock in the center, you know, Art Nouveau loves that. Symbolism is overt, a rebirth, a reawakening. The peacock sheds its tail and regrows a new one every year. So it's the whole idea that life is short, but art endures. And the really unusual motif here are the caryatids on fully Art Nouveau. There's a male and a female caryatid, and they appear to be oak trees that, you know, they're oak trees at the bottom, and then they develop into human figures at the top. A caryatid is a human form that supports a building. The one on the left, the female caryatid, has often been referred to as Miss Riga, which I rather like the idea. So that's a bit pale. I had a very lovely sunny day when I was going around Riga. This appears to have returned to Baltic Gothic in its forms. It's 1903 to 04 apartment block, and it's only in the detail really that you can find the Art Nouveau motifs, the flowers, as you can see, over the window openings, but it has a wonderful doorway. I do have a bit of a love of dragons, and obviously this is relating to the German family, I think, who commissioned it. You can see the date and the little elf, the little imp here over the doorway. What I really love is right at the top, these are cats. These are cats on the top of the building, and that's a bear right at the very top, which I presume all relate to the commission. So again, this is what I mean about the Gothic element coming out. So the downpipe is this wonderful dragon, and there's a sort of screaming male mask next to it. There's the male mask, and this is the dragon downpipe next door, and these are the dragons that greet you as you go in. Too much Game of Thrones. Here, by 1904, the Viennese element seems to have come to the fore, or perhaps it's Macintosh, because look at all these squares everywhere. As you know, Macintosh took the grid as his unique signature, There were often 4 squares together because he liked the idea of the Glasgow 4 being represented by the square or the grid. So it's ubiquitous in Vienna and also indicative of the Glasgow style. The undulating roofline, however, is more Germanic Jugendstil, and these appear to be stylized thistles, I think, looking at the shape of the leaves, though we might be looking at sunflowers. I think it's definitely stylized thistles, but you can see here that we're moving into what they would call their perpendicular or vertical style. Sometimes the buildings have been restored and you're not quite sure if earlier elements have disappeared, but here on Vidus Street, it's really just the doorway. The facade above, which has been restored, is, as you can see, devoid of any ornamentation, and I just don't know if that was how it was originally planned. But I wanted to include it because you can see they are leaning now, or by 1909, Pleschens is perhaps leaning more to folkloric motifs in the face mask above the door, but a lot of the floral motifs up here running across the facade around the window still seems to be organic French in terms of its origin. However, working with Eisen's Laub is seemed to be one of the fathers of Latvian national romanticism. You can see a complete shift. So this is a bit like the difficulty of working out what exactly is Otto Wagner and Joseph Maria Olbrecht when they're working together in Vienna before Olbrecht leaves to work in Darmstadt. So this translates on the front of the building as every man's home is his castle. I do like the 3x3 grid at the ends. And then this is what it looks like today, beautifully restored, with lots of elements here in the architecture, like the gable and the doorway, showing a clear reference to Finland, who was seen to be ahead of the game in terms of a national romantic style. So here's a better view of it. And this is a before and after. So this is what it looks like today. It's a very chic apartment block, probably would have been originally always shops along the bottom. And their courtyard in terms of their arrangement. So that large doorway there would take you into the courtyard. But here around the window, it's now been fully restored, are these much more evocative and overt folkloric elements, and this weird sort of way of taking a Gothic arch and squaring it off. So we know that Laub actually went to Finland in 1904. So this really comes over now in these later buildings, like post-1905, also post First Russian Revolution, which is really when I think the desire for Latvian individuality really comes to the fore. So this would be, you know, somewhere between their perpendicular style and their romantic style. This is Arthur Medlinger, who lives until 1961, as you can see. He also worked for Constantine Pleschens, but then sets up on his own in 1910. So he's a good example of the way in which Pleschens develops a school of architects. And we're looking here at the streetscape along, oh God, this is a terribly difficult road to pronounce, but you're looking along, you can see what I mean about how hard you have to work in terms of just walking the streets and looking for interesting buildings. So this is more overtly national romantic. It's the two of them working together in 1905, Pleschens and Laub. And the Finnish element really comes over here, not only in the unusual arch forms and the squaring off of the arches, but also this use of granite, which was seen to be very much a national romantic style. Again, the hardness of the north. Look at all those squares everywhere, though. That's Vienna or Macintosh, isn't it? So it's an interesting blend of folk art and modernity. Here's a better view now of the squared off arches and this use of granite, the hard material of the northern Jugendstil style. And the folk art motif, the zigzag pattern that you can see here in the entrance portal. And these rather nice would originally, I think, being lamps to either side. Again, please note those squared off arch forms. And actually on Alberta Strasse, this is me photographing it on the left-hand side, and this is what it looks like today. So it has not yet been restored, and I'm not surprised, because being on the Eisenstein street, it looks pretty boring compared to what's going on around it, all that florid ornamentation. But this is just as important, because this is all about National Romanticism. Those external turrets, those squared off arches, you know, they lopped the top off to get that square shape. The stylized trees, which again owe a lot to Finnish and Latvian folk art motifs. And you're back to that idea of every man's house as a castle. This one has been restored on Vilandes. Ilia is their word for a street or a strasse. There's a sort of faux half timbering across the top of this. This is a very overt Germanic gable. A folk art motifs on the extended overhanging oriel window, but the really obvious one, and this is Constantine's Pexens working on his own. It's that amazing doorway. But it's a bit schizophrenic, because that is the doorway with this sort of horseshoe-shaped entrance, which smacks of National Romanticism. But halfway along the facade, up here on this projecting window, you've got a nice group of Bacchic ladies dancing. So it's a strange combination of local and international. These really fascinate me, because I don't know if Laub had a hand in these two apartment blocks by Pexens. The inscribed ornamentation in the plasterwork is much more overtly in the National Romantic style. This is another building in need of rescuing. There's a lot of them. There's over 200 buildings that are important ones by Pexens in Riga alone, and he also worked in other Latvian cities. So here's an overall of the building, and you can see that the sgraffito plasterwork is in need of sort of picking out its decorative motifs. But you can see how this would also perhaps be described as their perpendicular style, certainly not florid like Mikhail Eisenstein's work on Alberta Strasse. And this one for the Riga Merchants Credit Society Bank, to me, looks much more Viennese in terms of its verticality and its stylized patterning. And then dating from 1910 at the bottom of Vilandes, and which has been beautifully done up. Again, there's echoes of National Romanticism. You've got your so-called vertical or parallel style, but a lot of the ornamentation, and your close up here of the sort of laurel motif, a rather lovely stylized lady on the front, and I've got an even closer motif here. These look almost, you know, back to French Art Nouveau, don't they? With their coupe de fouet, the whiplash motif that you can see here. So by 1910, Pexens appears to be blending multiple elements together to create a Latvian style. This is Eisen's Laub on his own, and this is one of the most renowned buildings in Riga, as it stands on a corner with its graffito decoration, and again is usually described as being in the perpendicular vertical style. I love the way they've tied themselves up to these very sort of like, well, descriptive terms, but to my mind, this vertical parallel element is the influence of Jugendstil as opposed to French Art Nouveau. And here's the map. So this here is hang on, I'll have a go. Lac Plaiesa Street, it's this one here. And you can see again just how many buildings there are in this very small area. So you just need to plan your walks carefully to maximize the potential and make sure that you don't miss anything. So Rudolf Philipps Dombergs, I thought to myself, ah yes, he died In 1918, he's again, you can tell that he's likely to be of Germanic Baltic extraction. But I thought, yeah, he would have died in the flu epidemic. No, he was shot. He was seen to be a revolutionary. So that's the reason for his termination in 1918. Now, this looks very Viennese, doesn't it? The verticality and the international motifs, but look around the doorway. The doorway has got a very clear reference to Latvian folk art motifs. So it's just to remind you here, before we go down Albertastrasse, which is the last part of my talk, how the buildings all cluster around specific streets. Okay, so Elizabeth Ilia has got loads. And this particular one is rather obviously in an international Art Nouveau style, looking at the ladies' heads around the door by one of the German Baltic architects, Hilbigs. Love it. This one is by Zerkowitz and is a double whammy. So one side looks out over Villans, Ilya, and the other one looks out in the other direction. See what I mean about having to walk a long way? And this again, looking at its motifs, is more international, eclectic in style. Here's a close-up of the ladies' heads, one right at the top in the attic story, and then a row of them running along the top here, the entablature, and very much in a French Art Nouveau style. Looks like Mucha had a hand in their designing. So the areas that you see, I'm showing you here how they cluster. So along that avenue, Bridbaz Ilya, and then this was the other road that had lots of them on. Can you see how they interconnect? And then both of these areas lie beyond Albertastrasse, so they're to the south of it. So do get good walking shoes. And there's Villandes, another one I can't pronounce. You see what I mean? So you've got to go up round here, down this one here to get onto Alberta Ilia. So we're going to end with this because, I mean, it's just one amazing building after another. But Mikhail Eisenstein does not progress into National Romanticism. He very much sticks to his, let's be honest, it's florid but wonderful international Art Nouveau style. He throws everything at his facades. On the other side, the apartments, apart from perhaps some plaster ceilings and some Art Nouveau fireplaces, were probably very conventional in their layout. It's just like looking at the big apartment blocks in Paris. This is the most walked street in Riga. So we start off with this one, number 13, which is virtually opposite number 12. Well, it is opposite number 12, which we've already visited by Pexens, and is the home of the Art Nouveau Centre in Riga and also the Rosenthals Museum. So at least all of those are close together. This is a neoclassical building. This is the number 13 is the buff-coloured one, and he just throws everything at it. And we do know, though we don't know much about his training, that we do know that Eisenstein, it was his son who was the film director and the author of the Battleship Potemkin. But the father, who is the architect, we do know that he studied in Russia, in St. Petersburg to be precise. The most outrageous, eclectic Art Nouveau building in St. Petersburg, very international in its outlook, as it's built for the Singer manufacturing, now known as the House of Books because it is now a bookshop. It was originally built Singer, as in the Singer sewing machines, is on Nevsky Prospect, and it's just ridiculous, as you can see. This is the one that I risked life and limb and imprisonment to run down and see. It's got the most ridiculous roof. I had to borrow that from the internet. It's got like a globe on the top. Perhaps it's because Singer got everywhere, with a Russian eagle. I mean, it's fantastic, isn't it? But it doesn't make a lot of sense. We'll see some more of the Singer building later. Oh yeah, you might just want to quickly note that the architect is Pavel Suzon, and Amandus Adamson was the sculptor. Anyway, back to Albertastrasse. It's just covered with stuff. Peacocks, my favourite. female mascarons, rather alluring young ladies, you know, with everything on show, I think is how I will put it. Face masks that appear to owe something to Greek theatre, and right at the very top of the building, an image of dawn with rays coming out of her head, you know, like a goddess. The idea again of greeting a new beginning in Riga. So some close-ups. So these rather well-endowed young ladies here who appear to be Moucheresque, the style of Alphonse Mucha, and my peacocks. A lot of the flowers or the foliage appears to be laurels. So here's what I mean about looks like rather like a Greek theatrical mask. And we've got hunting scenes, sort of a Diana motif running above it. So neoclassical ornamentation, we have horns. I mean, everything is on this building. And then Aurora appears to be at the top, celebrating the coming of a new age. There are Egyptian motifs, there are Greek motifs, there are Gothic motifs, looking at those amazing turrets to either side. And in fact, this is not on this building in Alberta Strasse, but on one nearby. I went around collecting auroras, women with rays of light coming out around their heads, so sort of like this idea of a dawn of a new age in Riga. So here's another one, again on a nearby building. It seems to be a particularly popular motif alongside the Masonic symbols, like the plumb bob, the set square, and the trowel down below. The Screaming Woman is a particular favourite of mine. She's right at the top of number 13, Alberta Strasse. I've got a close-up of her for you here. I've put a red circle around her on my slide. And she relates specifically to a building in Vienna. Here she is in Vienna. She was sculpted in Vienna by the wonderfully named Othmar Schenkovich, who did a lot of work for Otto Wagner. We're looking at the so-called Golden House, which is covered in laurels, picked out in gold. The medallions are by Koloman Moser, and each one of them has a meaning. They represent sort of all the things that we should look for in the perfect human being, you'll be pleased to know. And I think there's either 7 or 9 of them all together. But the important thing is that they very clearly, not Albert Einstein, but Eisenstein clearly knows what's going on in Vienna. And the Screaming Woman, well, I've never quite known what she's supposed to represent, either in Vienna or in Riga, but I'm assuming that she's screaming out the beginning of a new age, the triumph of art and its importance in society for transforming your environment into one that is beautiful. So there's a little cluster of buildings by Eisenstein that use coloured brick. So this is one of them. So this is also a double front. So this is on Strelniku Street, which is going on to Alberta. Okay, so it's in the same area. This was built as the Mitsova Private School. It's now part of the University of Riga and is the School of Economics. Because it's sort of semi-public, you might get into the lobby, I'm not promising. Again, it seems to have been inspired, this use of ceramics, by looking at Vienna. So here is the famous Meologa House by Otto Wagner, which abuts the Golden House. They're the same sort of date on the linker Wiensel. What I'm trying to show you here is that Mikhail Eisenstein clearly is outward looking in terms of his search for an Art Nouveau vocabulary. So the coloured brick here, very distinctive in blue. It's one of 3 buildings. And a lot of the ornamentation again is just straightforward neoclassical, like these young ladies here holding up reeds. And these ladies here coming out of the front of the building, which appear to be representing, you know, naval prowess. There are boats, and they appear to be holding hammers that they relate directly to the Singer building. So here is the, she's like a fairy with wings, and she's coming out of the Singer building again on what appears to be a Greek trireme, complete with her paddles, as you can see. So I'm sure that Eisenstein was familiar with this building, the Singer building on the Nevsky Prospect in St. Petersburg. So 2 views of it on my slide here. And I was able to sneak into the lobby, as I said, because it's now the part of the University of Riga. And you can see here how, you know, the decoration will continue into the lobby, but I have no idea what was actually provided by the architect in the apartments. They could have been quite conventional. Right, this little group that uses coloured brick. So here again, we're back on Elizabeth Street, and I've got some good before and afters because I saw this in 2009, and so you're sort of seeing it emerging from, it's been the whole sort of way in which the buildings have been revived in the last 20 years. So this is one of my favourite buildings in Riga because of the frieze along the top. Here's these 2 women, these 2 massive female mascarons with the peacock in the centre. You can see lots of Viennese motifs here though. Look, I mean, it's this idea of the Otto Wagner laurels and Greek helmets. And here, you know, the dominant feature, these oversized female masks or mascarons. And next to it, we have this one, which is also by Mikhail Eisenstein. And you can see what I mean about the sort of way that a streetscape is created. They're not quite in line, as you can see here, as the 2 buildings abut. And again, this appears to owe a lot more to French Art Nouveau with its use of female mascarons. I mean, it's just like throwing decoration at a building. Now, this is my before and after. Don't worry, last couple of slides. So this is me photographing 8 Alberta in 2009. So the blue brick is the distinguishing feature, but look at the state of it where the plaster work has literally fallen off. The rust on the balustrade. It's all looking rather sad, isn't it? The rust on the balustrade, the big female mascarons to either side, the femme fatale of Art Nouveau, and there's how it looks today. So it's just fun to do the befores and the afters. And a lot of buildings will have netting over them to protect you from the plaster work falling. Sorry about that. Oh, and it's magnificent now. It's been fully restored. Alberta Strasse, number 8. You can see how the motifs move from one building to another. Laurels, panpipes, female faces. The guy at the top appears to be coming out of oak leaves. And the entrance lobby of number 8 is truly magnificent with these pomegranates and ladies' heads. And the ladies' heads are clearly based on these. They even have the big Alphonse Mouchet sort of pendulous earrings to either side. You're only going to get into those if you've got a local guide with you. Number 4, Alberta Strasse, is even more dramatic, and the totally unpronounceable Russian name at the top is the entrepreneur who commissioned all these apartment blocks. They were speculative. They were to make money. It's now, as you can see, been institutionalized, looking at the flags in front. The EU, and I think that's the Latvian flag. You can correct me later. Anyway, this is truly awesome on the outside. Here's some close-ups. Rather Egyptian lions start right down the bottom. As you can see, they flank the entrance. Bit of before and after here in my photographs. This is what it looks like today. It has the most wonderful set of gorgons at the top. Strange windows that look a little like keyholes. The tripartite window at the balcony level is absolutely typical of Belgian Art Nouveau. And here are the gorgons at the top. So you will recall this is a direct reference to this building, where the 3 gorgons, who represent architecture, painting and sculpture, protect and decorate the entrance to Josef Maria Olbrecht's Secession House, dates to 1898. Here they are on the top of this apartment block, screaming the triumph of the arts over Riga. Fantastic. There's a better view of them, redeployed to Riga. And then this is last couple of slides. This is number 4 Alberta, even better entrance, as you can see, beautifully restored. Same motif of the Art Nouveau Mushka-esque lady's head with a wonderful headdress and long earrings. And here's a better view of them, aren't they stunning? I can't guarantee that you'll see them. It all depends if your local guide has the wherewithal to get you in. I took these off the internet because this is a very recent restoration project. I love their Mushka-esque, Mucha-like earrings. Mucha is Czech, remember, Czech origin, though he finds fame and fortune in Paris. And the other dominant thing to remember is the laurel, which, as I said, really is my link through to Otto Wagner's golden style. And the stencil decoration, which is rather fun, continues right the way up the staircase, but is more overtly neoclassical, I think you'll agree, than the decoration of number 12 Alberta, which was the entrance to the Art Nouveau Centre. So my last building, one of my favourites, because those are holes at the top, windows with no fenestration or glass. They are just pierced to the sky. So this is how I saw it in 2009. Again, there is lip service here to the use of tile, those red bands running up the facade. This is me in 2009. And again, the Greek motif dominates, doesn't it, in terms of the architectural origins. And then this is what it looks like today. Lots of people want to stand and be photographed with the sphinxes outside this particular building on Alberta Strasse. Beautifully restored today, but still plenty of work to do, even on this most famous of all the streets in Riga. And the logo for the entire city is a Jugendstil cat. You can find it. We're back with Frederick Schiefer. Seethals is the Latvian form of his name. And the famous black cat here, there's two of them right at the top of the building. So if you go to visit Riga, please bring back a black cat mug as your souvenir. Allegedly, the owner commissioned those especially for the top of his building as he was cheesed off with the local council, and their tails, which are up in the air, evidently are facing towards the council offices. I think that's a bit of an urban legend, but I rather like the idea. The entrance is more over, obviously, in a Latvian national romantic style, but I do love the idea of the Riga black cat. So I promised just to show you how awful it looked after the war. So there's St. Peter's, completely destroyed in the bombing at the end of the Second World War. And look at the state of the buildings beyond St. Peter's. So as you go round, just remember, we're lucky to have anything, as like Budapest, the city really suffered at the end of the Second World War. There's not that much about Riga in my book on Art Nouveau architecture, but it was simply lack of time, and also this wider ambition to actually try and write a book about Art Nouveau Jugendstil in the Baltic area. So there's my website, ann-anderson.com, not slash. So everything goes up on my blog.